welcome once again to Sid Cordell. And Sid, we've got a challenge for you. I bet you wish all those years ago, when you were 16, you could get the vote. Listen, yes, you're a political animal, and therefore maybe it would have been appropriate. But is it a bit cruel to say a lot of 16-year-olds are in La La Land, and this is absolutely cynical of Keir Starmer?
Well, I think what I would say is that 16-year-olds haven't got the historical context which older voters have got as to what's going on. And historical context is extremely important. I mean, I think it's very important now, given that we've now got a Labour government committed to tax and spend. And those of us that are older know what tax and spend was all about in previous Labour governments. Now, you can say, well, that makes not much difference between 16-year-olds and 18-year-olds, but at least 18-year-olds have got a chance to have done more study, more research, to have greater knowledge. There's no chance, really, that 16-year-olds will have got a proper understanding of what was going on back in the 1970s, when we had Labour governments committed to tax and spend. So, I mean, I think it's very, very important that voters have got the knowledge and the background and awareness of what's going on in order to make a proper decision. And I'm afraid 16-year-olds haven't really got that knowledge and understanding. So I think it's definitely a retrograde spec having voters, so people are allowed to vote at 16.
Well, he's out to get Nigel more than anything. The most conservative, small c calculation means that Nigel will be at least nine seats down.
Well, yes, but they're also saying that if they introduce a new definition of Islamophobia, he's going to be 100 seats up. So.
That's true.
I mean, I don't honestly think that giving 16-year-old the vote is going to make all the difference. If instead of having one government, we'll have another government. Frankly, I think the Labour Party has sunk whatever happens.
I tell you what, I get really tired of, Sid, and that's the lies, or let's call them in
Yeah.
generous half-truths that
Yeah.
are coming out. Oh, well, you can join the army at 16. Well, you can, but you can't fight till you're 18. I mean, that is a half-truth, which is a lie.
Well, yes, no, I totally agree. I mean, yeah, I don't like half truths. I mean, people say things, well, it's got some truth in it. Yeah, it may have some truth in it. But this is, this Labour government's doing it all the time. I mean, inflation was 11% under the Tories. Well, yes, it was at its peak, but it was 2% when they left office. So you inherited inflation at 2%, not at 11%. You know, the deficit mushroomed under the Tories. Well, yes, it did during COVID, but in the years going up to COVID, it went down quite significantly from 140 billion inherited in 2010 to 34 billion in 2019, and it was 54 billion when they left office. So despite COVID, they Conservatives have got it back down again. So I mean, yeah, I mean, this is where government should give a proper full picture, not pick up statistics. I mean, they say, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, but we should be able to use statistics in a way that's responsible to give an accurate impression, not using statistics just to create a case, which basically Keir Starmer's doing all the time, all the time.
Well, an even more dastardly act, in my opinion, was confirmation, as if we needed it, that he wants us back in the EU by stealth. I mean, putting this thing, or about to be put through, the trade agreement with the EU depends on us basically paying for the work that the civil service has to do in Brussels and other parts. Yeah, you can trade with us on several goods and items, but you'll have to pay for it. We might as well be paying into the EU that we got out of paying. What was it, 92 billion, I'm sorry. That's what it saved us coming out. And we're after paying them again. Can you see him trying that on Trump? Oh, yes, we'll sell you our Renault cars if you contribute to us. I mean, it's nonsense.
Yeah, we roughly gained £10 billion by leaving the EU. Those were our net contributions. You know, when you took into consideration, obviously, what we gained from being in the EU compared with what we had to pay them, well, it was roughly a £10 billion difference. But yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer was very clear prior to the last general election is that we've left the EU now and we've got to make the most of it. We can't go back in again. That's what he said, and he was very clear. And now I think, which I'm quite sure is true, that he didn't want Brexit to be an issue in the last general election. So if any time Brexit was raised, it was just like, well, that argument's over. You know, we're not going back in. That argument, you know, we've left and that's it. There's no point in discussing it anymore. He didn't want to discuss it because the more he discussed Brexit, the more he would have lost votes. Because if we had started discussing Brexit in the last general election and he started saying, well, I want to get a closer relationship with the EU than we've got now, and I want to go back into some of the EU schemes. For instance, I want to go back into the EU Defence Pact, and it may cost us some money. But if it costs us some money, I don't care. I think we need to pay that in order to get back into the EU schemes. If he started saying that during the general election campaigns, he'd have lost votes, and he'd have lost votes hand over fist. So he didn't say that, but that's what he's doing. So this is where it gets so frustrating because government should stand on a manifesto and then when they're elected, implement the manifesto they stood on, not stand on one manifesto and then do something completely different, which is what this government is doing. And they're certainly doing it over the EU.
Moral compass springs at once again to mind, and especially when, before we leave the 16-year-old voters, they've had this, of course, in Scotland and Wales for a while, and they've not made the best of it, to say the least. And this is another casualty of Tony Blair. And too much was given away to the various other countries, inverted commas, if they've got this much power. And it's not worked, clearly. But the other thing that's, in one sense, the elephant in the room is our millennials, which we're talking about, and Gen Zers that are going to be on the voting register. Instead of the DEI problem, we've got a GEH problem. There's a new one for you. And that stands for grievance, entitlement, and historical ignorance. Now, that sums up, I'm afraid, many of that generation. It's easy to say, well, no, they don't really look at history and learn from that in many ways. Oh, it's slavery. Well, hang on. Who got rid of slavery as an example? The entitlement and grievance you can perhaps lump together. The world owes you a living. If you're brought up in the average primary and secondary school, to have thoughts this way, you're entitled to do this. And if you feel down one day, there's something wrong with you. You've got a mental illness. No wonder it's called the snowflake generation.
Well, yes, I think you're right, though there are clear evidence that there is a revival going on among young people. So you see, the New Age religion has been trying for a long time to push their agenda within schools at a very early age, because that's what they said they wanted. If we change the minds of young people, we can change the minds of the whole of society over time. But young people nowadays have got such access to social media, which means access to the truth, that it's not possible just to indoctrinate them with lies, and that's the end of the story. And now we've got this revival going on among young people, where if people don't know, there's a surge of young people going to church now, and not just to any old church. It's not going to some dead Church of England church. They're going to revival churches where they're really seeking God and seeing the power of God being poured out. And now that's going on. We're seeing a clear change. But when it comes to politics, I've got no doubt that the majority of 16-year-olds won't vote anyway. I mean, it's quite clear from university that when students are at university, if a general election is called while students are at university, most of the students don't vote. I mean, you're literally looking at 10 or 15% of students that vote in general election, which is an abysmal number. That's when they're at university. When they're under the influence of their parents, they may be more likely to vote because the parents say, "Oh, come on, Johnny, come on, I'm going to vote. You come to vote with me." So that may mean they're more likely to vote on that basis. But if it's just left to their own devices, they don't. So, I don't think we need to be too concerned about that.
The control of the state, again, is concerning many people, including yours truly. We've got a situation with that. Well, it's the Afghanistan problem has highlighted it more than anything. People are realizing how much control you have over the British public. And I mentioned last week to you, said it's like being in China. Well, it's getting that way. I mean, to hide this deliberately, and it's both parties, back to the blob, therefore. It's the civil servants at a certain level that are keeping this quiet. It's sprung up and bit them big time, hasn't it?
Well, I think we probably differ over this, I'm afraid, because you see, what actually happened was somebody in the SAS, whether it was somebody in administration or it was only an army officer, leaked gave information, I would say, down an email that was not a secure email. And that email that the information went down was hacked into and the information obtained. And they only knew the information had been obtained sometime later when it appeared on Facebook. And as soon as it appeared on Facebook, literally immediately, the Ministry of Defence, at that time led by Ben Wallace, sprung into action and immediately applied for an injunction to stop the information going out. And it was the judge, not anybody else, it was the judge who said, well, given the matter of this serious, I think you should have a super injunction, not just a normal injunction. The super injunction basically meaning that they couldn't just, not only the information was protected, the fact that the information got out was also protected. So it was also illegal even to talk about the injunction. So that was then in place in 2023. And very shortly afterwards, Ben Wallace was replaced as Defence Secretary. But the super injunction was put in place. The Labour Party knew about it. They were offered a complete briefing, which Starmer said he didn't want, but Healy, their defence spokesman, did know about it. And they decided when they came into office that they would keep the super injunction in place, and they kept it in place for another year after they came into office. So the argument that somehow the super injunction was disgusting and against civil liberties, and I'm sorry, it just doesn't stand up, frankly, because both parties, Conservative and Labour, agreed that it was necessary. Now, it absolutely was necessary. I believe there's something like 16,000 names on the list, including SAS people, by the way, and some 14,000 of them were already in the UK. Now it's been released that the injunction was put in place. And those people needed to be protected. I mean, we're talking about people who are translators, people working for the British government, and also some of them spies. So they're actually giving information on Afghanistan to the British government. And the idea that those names could somehow not be protected, I mean, is obviously nonsense. Those names had to be protected. It wasn't the Conservative government's fault that the names came out. It was the fault of somebody in the Ministry of Defence, somebody in the SAS office, which, by the way, that person who put that information down in non-secure email has already been relieved of their duties. They're no longer being employed and haven't been employed for a long time. So that problem, if you like, has been solved. I mean, the person has taken responsibility and lost their job. So, it's not a fault of the Conservative government. It's not a fault of the Labour government. It's something that happened, and they dealt with a super injunction. A super injunction was the right way to deal with that particular issue at that time. There's no question about it, in my view.
Are you saying that the first judge got it right and the second judge got it wrong when he said, release the injunction?
I'm saying both judges got it right. The first judge got it right, that a super injunction was needed. The second judge got it right to say that, okay, it's now been in place for 2 years. We no longer need it in place any longer because all the people have now been resettled, so it can be the matter can now come out into the public domain. I think both judges got it right, frankly. But the Labour Party are now trying to make political capital out of it. And Keir Starmer's trying to make political capital out of it. But he can't actually say that the Conservative government did anything wrong. And if they did do something wrong, then he didn't correct the wrong when he came into office. So, I mean, it's just, frankly, I mean, it's just ridiculous trying to make political capital out of what was and a mistake, no doubt. And it's a mistake that could have led to people suffering, but I don't think has led to people suffering because it was kept quiet and the problem was dealt with behind the scenes.
Let's go to an example in London of a closed state. Being polite there. You cannot go through any street in London without talking to a local shopkeeper, and he will tell you how many times people come in for their midday meal and walk out with it without paying because it's under £200. There's clearly not enough policing going on, but even though you can't find a policeman for crime, you get 11 of them turning up instantly to a man standing there and saying, we have a problem with LGBT. He's taken off the street immediately, taken into custody. Now, he was quite careful on what he said, but from his point of view, that is not something to be recommended as a lifestyle. And he said so in the street. Now, where do you get 11 policemen at once from? Oh, well, we all know now, don't we?
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous, frankly. And the courts have said over and over again, no one has a right not to be offended. It's what often happens in these situations is you have a street preacher who's boldly preaching the gospel, and a homosexual comes up and you're saying, I'm a homosexual, I live with my male partner. Are you saying I'm a sinner? And the street preacher says, we're all sinners. We're all fallen short of the glory of God. Yes, certainly, the Bible says homosexuality is sin. That's something you need to repent of. Oh, you've offended me. I'm calling the police. And it's not something that street preachers generally, want to start talking about or do start talking about. They only talk about it if someone asks them a question. But if someone asks them a question, they're going to give an honest answer, frankly. But when the street preacher says, yes, we believe homosexuality is sin, that is not against the law. It is absolutely not against the law. We've had a situation, by the way, that's come to light just this week. I know this week is very young, but it's come to light today, perhaps I should say, of Hillingdon Council that put in place a public sector protection order saying that basically you weren't allowed to use loudspeaker equipment or preach loudly or sing loudly in the street or have a congregation of people together in the street in Hillingdon. And this was challenged by the Christian Legal Centre and by Kingswood Church in Uxbridge, which is part of Hillingdon, because they go out into the streets and do the preaching. And the courts have said this PSPO is invalid. Well, actually, what's happened is that before the case actually came to court, the council withdrew the PSPO and have paid the church £20,000 for their legal costs and have now completely withdrawn the PSPO. So basically, they're accepting that saying that Christians can't preach in the street or sing or whatever, or gather together is actually contrary to the law. And by the way, they're trying to renew the public sector protection order in Ealing at the moment, and it's been used in Ealing they've actually charged me and fined me £100 because of it, because all I did was leave some leaflets at an abortion centre, and they're saying that was offensive against the public sector protection order. No one else was there, and I was there on my own, left the leaflets and left. What the leaflets actually said was reporting the fact that someone had died at that particular abortion centre, and no action was taken so anyone going there should be aware that there's a death occurred because somebody left the centre in a taxi and died afterwards, and the abortion centre didn't take proper care. and there was no repercussion to the centre for doing it. That's what the leaflet actually said. But they said obviously it was offensive. Well, but why a public sector protection order? I just gone there on my own and left the leaflet and walked away. I mean, somebody else was praying outside, Christian Hacking, disabled man, praying outside on his own. They arrest him and he's charged. It's just, and then he's fined because, you were sitting there praying, you're sitting in your wheelchair, praying outside the centre. They now want to renew this public sector protection order, and they're now probably going to apply it more widely. It's just there's a total misuse. It's an utter misuse of the law, frankly.
Yeah, a kindred subject about the dark state. And recently, the Conservative woman have started complaining because they feel got at. Now, this is a magazine on the internet, which really has some very good contributors from time to time, and they do a good job. We find that Prevent, of all people, have complained about them. They've accused them of being far extreme right lobbyists. Now, what Prevent doing this for? Well, we both know that. Who is behind Prevent and their utter and abject failures, for instance, with Southport, with the Manchester bombing, and with several other things, when they clearly knew that that person should be stopped, got hold of? They're not preventing anything except free speech. And why have they had a go at the Conservative woman?
Well, yes, absolutely. Prevent was set up to deal with terrorism. And the vast majority of terrorism in this country is committed by Islamic terrorists, I'm afraid. That's the truth of it. I mean, what we had on 7th of July 2007, when we had that terrible bombing in Tavistock Street in the centre of London, which was also bombing on the Underground. That was all done by Islamic terrorists. I mean, the London Bridge bomb was Islamic terrorists. The attack, which actually killed a policeman who was guarding Parliament, that was an Islamic terrorist. I mean, the vast majority of the terrorism in this country is Islamic terrorists. Now, what Prevent was set up to do was to try and get people young, so that if somebody looks as though they're going towards a terrorist lifestyle, in other words, they're being indoctrinated into Islamic radicalism, then we need to get hold of them, to talk to them at an early age, and to show them that that sort of behaviour is wrong. And we hope that way that we can avoid terrorist incidents. Now, that's what Prevent was set up for. Now, to actually use that legislation to attack, some mother who's concerned about the way her children are being taught in school, I mean, it's just utterly, utterly perverse and wrong. And by the way, I've got to say, I have studied law myself. I mean, many years ago now, but when I was studying law, one of the great judges at the time was Lord Denning. And Lord Denning used to come out with what some people would say was strange judgments, because they seem to be different from a lot of other people's judgments. But what Lord Denning always used to do was to look at the purpose of the law and what the law was trying to achieve, what Parliament was trying to achieve by the law, rather than simply applying the letter of the law. Now, when you do that, you look at the purpose of the law and you apply the purpose of the law. You can't do things like they're doing to Lucy Connolly, because you could see very clearly that that was not the intention of Parliament, to include people like her under the Prevent legislation. So, we need to get back, frankly, to Lord Denning's approach to the law, and we'd all be far better off.
Interesting. Let's go with two things actually, which don't appear to be linked, but they jolly well are. Brainwashing through the media, especially the BBC, and certain newspapers and publications. And I am very cautious when I watch any programme from the BBC now. I've got a hit list of where I'm going to be affected. Countryfile, good programme, but going donkey's years. And I watched that from time to time. I thought, shall I risk it? what am I going to get preached about today? And sure enough, it went to a farm, cattle farm, rare breeds, and they had other animals. And all they were focusing on was the grandfather, father, son, and especially daughter. It turned out that program was a push for women. Oh, they can do every job. And the whole program, except from the very start, was about how this young lady, I'm sure she was very competent, family member, and it was about her, how she was taking care of mainly the pigs. And I thought, well, that's unbalanced, but it's clearly the woke issue coming through the BBC for promoting groups that need promoting. I'm sure the women's groups don't need promoting, but they're at it. And I turned to my wife halfway through. I think I'll turn this off. No, I said, I'm waiting for somebody in a wheelchair to come along. And blow me, within 2 minutes, Sid, another presenter came on with a wheelchair. It's embarrassing. Do the BBC think we're stupid? Obviously they do. Now I'm going to link that with brainwashing to the green thing, the doom that awaits us all. And it's affecting the Met Office big time because they're into doom. Bad news, it sells their product, of course. People tune in and say, oh, golly, there's a thunderstorm been forecast, to make sure it's not over me. It's all part of the bad news that sells advertising space, etc. But they've gone really over the top. It's a nonsense. There's something called the RCP 8.5, and that's a model about what will happen in the future. Of course, it's all doom and gloom. And it contains specific things that are spewed out of the computer, saying that by the year 2070, if we indeed arrive at that year, there will be 10 times more use of coal in the United Kingdom. So it's a classic case where they get this, but as we know, rubbish into a computer, rubbish out, multiplied by 10. Now it's a nonsense. It depends on what they want to prove. They say, oh, well, population growth is going to be substantial. What they don't say is what new tech might bring in this time, apart from anything else. And I'll give an example. One, of course, is a horrible, filthy lorries coming up and down the road, and especially if you're driving, because it's not got rid of, even though you've got filters in your car. Some of it is, but not much. And the stuff that comes out of the average diesel engine, especially of a lorry, is awful. So somebody invented the blue fuel additive, and that's done remarkably well. You can't really breathe the fumes, but it takes the nasties and the smell out of it. So that's what I'm referring to. Maybe in the next 10, 20 years, we'll have fission at last, and we don't need any more stupid windmills and the like. So it's all doom and gloom. It sells the product. We've got to look at fact, Sid.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. The actual demand for electricity at the moment is going up substantially, a lot, partly because of the increased use of battery cars. Not everyone's happy with their battery cars. Some people are going back to petrol or diesel cars, but the overall use of battery cars has gone up, which means the overall demand on the grid has gone up quite considerably. And this idea that somehow we've got to get rid of gas-fired power stations is just nonsense. Building new nuclear power stations is going to take time before they come on tap. So yeah, in the short term, there is need for increased power. And I think see anything wrong with coal-fired power stations, provided the sulfur is removed. And in the advanced coal-fired power stations, they had desulfurization plants. It's the sulfur that causes damage, not the carbon. And by the way, when we're talking about this, I just found out today that the amount of carbon in the air is actually 0.042%, which basically means it's one molecule of carbon for 2,000 250 molecules of something else. And the vast majority of air is either oxygen 21% or nitrogen 78%. Everything else is less than 1%. But the idea that somehow carbon in the air is a problem is just utter nonsense. And so, what they're now saying is they've got to get rid of cows because of the flatulation, which causes carbon. It's just the whole thing is just ridiculous, frankly. The whole environment agenda is just mad. So if we go back to coal-fired power stations and remove the sulfur, there's absolutely no problem with them whatsoever.
Well, it's doubly mad if you consider what China and India are doing. It's crazy. Before we take another breath, let's have a light relief and go to footy a little bit early, and we'll come back to it later. But I've been very popular, or should I say unpopular. Again, the BBC are promoting women's football. Perhaps it's the only thing they can show like mad. And I don't watch it because I like to be entertained, and I'm not by women's football. Sorry, girls. If you want to watch it, fine. I'm happy about that. Say the same thing with cricket, but to put it on a pedestal where it is was really brought down to earth last week when we had the famous game whereby there were 14 penalties taken at the end of the scrap. We had a 2-2 draw, and there were 14 penalties taken. 9 of them were missed. Sid, that's well below Conference League level, and I don't watch that.
Well, the Swedish goalkeeper was very good. I mean, she was really very good. I mean, and for the standard of penalty that was delivered to her, I mean, she went the right way and she saved numbers of the penalties. There were several penalties that went over the bar as well. So they couldn't even get the penalty on target. I mean, the first rule of penalty taking is you've got to get on target, because if you don't get the penalty on target, there's no way it's going to go in. But yeah, with I think it was 2 penalties that went over the bar, and I think the others were saved. And the English goalkeeper as well was also very good. I mean, she also saved some penalties. So I mean, it's I think you do have to give some credit to the goalkeepers, despite what you say.
Sid watches women's football. There's no hope for the man. Anyway,
To be honest with you, I didn't watch the whole match. I just watched the end, but I did watch the penalties. Yeah.
the goal attempts, yes. Listen, we're teasing, ladies. You get on and enjoy it. But I'm sorry, I'm not going to be on board. Now, back to the real stuff, he says. Or is it? I tell you what, people are getting panicking a bit. They look at what Israel did, and indeed other countries, but mainly Israel, when they got the dome over their country, when they were being bombarded by Iran, etc. And 90-odd% it was successful. And people are saying, hang on, with these new super speed missiles, we're not that far away from the action now. And we've got nothing. We've hardly got an army. Never mind if anything happens, Sid. We've had it. We're a goner.
No, I think you're right. I mean, our policy is a missile shield, and it has been for some time. And Israel's been very successful with the Iron Dome and the I think it's called the David Sling, one of their other missile defense programs, which looks at longer range weapons. They've got several different systems there in place shooting down missiles. And of course, when countries were working together, the first time Iran shot a load of missiles at Israel, and every single one was shot down. And when Israel was working on its own, they still managed to shoot down about 90% of the missiles. Only about 10% from Iran actually got through. But Putin has been threatening the UK. I mean, because of the attitude we've taken over Ukraine. And by the way, it is with some justification, because when Russia first invaded Ukraine, Biden said, Russia's got nuclear weapons, there's nothing we can do. And it was Boris Johnson who said, come on, we'll get behind you to to Zelensky and actually promised that the British government would be sending military support to Ukraine. And that was what infuriated Putin, because he thought that in the first 3 days the war would be over and they would just go in and Kiev would be flattened and they would replace the government. Zelensky would be forced out and they'd replace the government with their puppet. That's what he thought would happen. When he invaded, he got no idea that the war would be going on for 3 years. And it was Britain that gave Zelensky the backbone to resist. And it was only after that Ukraine had the initial success, which left all the Russian vehicles piling up on the road, that Biden then came in and thought, oh, they haven't just lost in 3 days, And by the way, Biden also told Zelensky to run away. He said, we'll help you get out of the country because there's nothing you can do. And it was only after the British government support that he suddenly realized, oh, maybe we can help Ukraine and they can resist Russia. But so Putin was furious with Britain, and he's still furious with Britain, and he's threatening to send missiles over to Britain. And frankly, we should have an effective missile shield so we could shoot down any missiles that Russia sent in our direction and protect our towns and cities. This idea of mutually assured destruction, if you fire a nuclear weapon at us, we'll fire one back from our submarines. I'm sorry, I don't believe that Starmer would do it, frankly. I don't believe many people think Starmer would do it. If there was a nuclear weapon on the way to on the way to the UK, he'd probably be ringing up Trump and saying, "Oh, I just found out there's a nuclear weapon. What do I do? What do I do?" And by the time he'd found out what to do, it would have landed.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you what, Trump knows what to do. And I'm going to compare and contrast, as the examination papers used to say, what happens in America, what happens in the United Kingdom. Trump gave a big 250 birthday present or Independence Day present, same thing. And it was well received. He has, reduced tax overall by 3-4%. How's he done it? Well, 2% off anybody that is earning less than $100,000, immediate present. No tax on overtime. That's very interesting, that is. And another interesting feature is no tax on tips. And boy, is that a big thing in America, of course. It's 20%, otherwise they chase you down the road. So the progressive, let's call it, in the right sense of the word, way of looking at growth, he's pursuing. We're in the opposite direction in UK.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've said before. I mean, I've done my video on the economy, which I think you've seen, which I would encourage other people to see. Which I won't go into the detail now, but I mean, in order to get growth, what you need to do is to cut red tape, save on revenue spending, increase capital spending, cut taxes. That's how you get growth. What our government is doing is increasing revenue spending phenomenally, with an extra 88 billion on Quangos, which is all red tape, and they're increasing taxes. They've increased national insurance. They're increasing other taxes, and they're reducing capital spending. So they're taking all the steps to reduce growth. Trump knows what he's doing, so Trump is doing exactly what I've said that we should be doing. And okay, I mean, he might be a little bit reckless, people might say, with the extent to which he's cutting taxes, but as long as he's cutting revenue spending, and he's had his Department of Government Efficiency, which is supposedly driving revenue spending down. They've been abolishing the Department of Education, getting rid of all US overseas aid. He's been doing a number of things to drastically cut revenue spending. Provided he does it enough, the UK economy will thrive. And also, you see, the other thing that's happening is we're taking measures to attack business. They're even talking about a wealth tax, and frankly, just talking about it is going to drive people abroad. At the same time as Trump is saying, "Welcome to the United States. Come back. We're cutting your taxes. You're going to be better off here." And he's doing the right things. And by the way, what this government's doing to attacking the rich is just political. It's just political. It's not pragmatic, because they must know that attacking the rich is going to drive them abroad. And of course, it's happening. It is driving them abroad. So, but they're doing it for political reasons because they hate the rich, basically, because they are socialists. They're making all the wrong decisions. This government.
It's clearly political envy. We've got that exactly the same thing from an extreme left government, left-wing government. Here in Spain, they're coming out with these bizarre laws to get at, believe it or not, especially the Brits, with this 100% extra tax if you're buying a house at the wrong time. And indeed, this very day, the head of Hacienda, which is the tax office in Spain, the ex-head, said they're deliberately after the British. Now, for whatever reason, I don't know, except there you go, guys, you've got to watch yourself. If you want to make some money, don't come to Spain if you've got a lot. There's a famous saying down here, basically, how to make a lot of money in Spain. Well, bring a lot of money that you don't mind losing, because I'll tell you what, it goes very, very quickly. Okay, listen, we've got to cover a couple of subjects before we get onto the footy again. And one of them, checks and balances, new laws, jobs for nothing. Now, I'll tell you what this is about. It's about, and it's not just UK, it's everywhere throughout Europe at least. We've got that many laws now, GDPR being a real thorn in the flesh over here. You can't say anything, do anything without warning notices. Every phone conversation, they're frightened to death of GDPR, data protection. But let's consider the computer. When the PC came along, they said, oh, it's our savior. We don't need to cut trees down. The Green Lobby were jumping them down. Well, I'm sorry, it's a nonsense. There's more paperwork now being generated by computers, despite the warnings on half the letters emails you get through computers. I never forget the day when we were interviewed prior to our residence in Portugal. Now, when we spent the month, Portugal is our residence, and we work there indeed. And having said that, the actual attitude of the functionarios, the civil servants, is so different between UK, Portugal, and Spain. Spain, wow, what are you doing in here? How much do you owe us? It's terrible. They'd never get away with it anywhere else, but that's how it's always been for 40, 50 years, experience of it. But in Portugal, we were invited to the tax office as part of our registration. I thought, oh, don't like the sound of that. And we walked in there, man sat behind his computers with a stack of paper. The whole wall was filled of this big room. And I said, what is that? And he said, he was in a joking mood, I've got my hands on you. I know exactly what you're up to. You'll have to tell me the whole truth on your annual tax return. I said, come on, seriously, what is it? He said, well, that's what we have to do. We've got to print out hard copy what's on the computer. They've not got room no cupboards, no desks, no cabinets, nothing. There it was, piled high. Now, my contention is, let's go back to your childhood, Sid, and talk Kalamazoo. Now, those were big rolls that sat on your desk. And when somebody came in, let's say it was a shop, and ordered a TV, you put in the little space, TV bought by Mr. Mrs. What's it, and the date. And that was it. Done. Didn't have to go into computers, didn't go up the line. For data, this is the problem, data. And most of the data that's collected, and there's 2 or 3, usually ladies, not their fault, involved in all this, whereby we are providing work that does not exist. Real work, if you like, care work, etc. You can't get in there because it's easy to sit behind a computer. And the data is largely not used. Now, data is used, of course, in medicine, and it's been a real godsend. It's fantastic. what you can do with computers and the data that comes out and is shared, if it is in a correct way. But for most businesses, it's like a heavy weight round your head. You're going to sink with it sooner or later. A millstone, indeed. So we've got to have a rethink because it's affecting the whole of society.
Yeah, I mean, like you, I don't enjoy paperwork, and actually, to be fair, I get very little paper nowadays through the door. I mean, in the olden days, when I was a financial advisor and running my own business, the first thing I would do was in the morning every day would be to open the post, and I would have probably 10 or 11 pieces of post that I had to open and deal with. These days, I look at my emails and I spend quite a bit of time, actually, most days reading my emails. I do read all my emails. I'm not quite so good on WhatsApp, and it's actually a much more efficient system. And also, running the Christian People's Alliance, I send out a certain amount of stuff through email as well. I mean, we've got a consultation on at the moment in Ealing, which I referred to earlier on their public sector protection order, and I've sent an email to all our supporters in Ealing asking them to reply to the consultation. And it's the same with contacting MPs. I mean, in the olden days, you'd write to your MP. Very few people write to their MP nowadays, but you can send an email to the MP, and even though MPs get an enormous number of emails, they do have people that read them all, and you can know that your email is going to get read, and over time, to a lot of emails you get replies. It's a lot more efficient way of doing things. People can get flooded, absolutely get flooded, but you also have to be willing to use the block every so often. I mean, if I get a load of emails from a company, for instance, I just block them all. But I have two emails, by the way. One is AOL, which tends to be flooded, and the other one is Yahoo, which I only keep for a personal email and for CPA. And if companies start sending lots of stuff to that email address, I just block them, so that at least the emails that come to Yahoo are emails that I want to read pretty well. So I think there's ways of handling data, there's ways of dealing with it, and provided you handle it and deal with it properly, I think the whole system can be a lot more efficient than in the olden days when everything was paper.
There you are. There's hope, is there? Well, yeah, some would think so. Let's briefly touch on a subject that, although briefly, is a bit difficult, Sid. I do admire some of the Labour spokesmen at the moment, how they've got the chutzpah to stand up there and say what they're saying about how great the economy is going since they've been in power. Well, come on, let's face them down. Inflation up, big fall in manufacturing, a massive fall in manufacturing. Business they know nothing about. And none of them have worked in it at cabinet level, and very few, because a lot of them come straight out of university at any other level. So how do you square the circle? What do you say? I mean, do they believe their own rhetoric?
Well, what they're trying to do is to do what Tony Blair did so successfully, which was to present spin. So you've got to try and give a good spin on everything, and you've got to have a line. And what the line is on this issue, is they try and put it forward, and they try and put it forward on interviews. The problem is that the media can't be controlled nowadays as well as it could be in the days of Tony Blair, which was, people don't know, was from 1997 to 2008, 2009. In those days, I mean, he could control the day's news. I mean, you see, we now have GB News, which is presenting very different news and becoming very popular, and the government can't control their news. And it's the same like Fox News as well in America. I mean, it's not news that can be controlled in the way that the rest of the media can be controlled, and also Newsmax in America. So it's a lot harder for them to control the news. And when they can't control it, and the thing is, you see, because GB News have been so successful, and some of the other news outlets feel as though they've also got to be robust with some Labour politicians, so they won't just toe the line like the media did in the Tony Blair era. So you do find that you get some tough questions put across, even on mainstream media, of the government politicians. And I'm afraid the reality is that, yes, they made a total hash of running government, for the reasons that we talked about earlier. But the biggest reason is chasing the rich people abroad and putting VAT on school fees as well, which we've not talked about, isn't actually raising any money at all, because they're driving more people into state education. There's a lot of private schools that are now having to close, and they're not raising a lot of extra money from it. It was all just a political thing to hit the rich, and I'm afraid it's just counterproductive. The whole approach of this government is counterproductive. They don't know what they're doing. And they've also increased spending on quangos drastically, set up 28 new quangos, increased spending on them by 88 billion, and the spending was already mushroomed. There's already 100 billion more in real terms than it was in 2010. So, if we go back now to our spending of 2010, we can save 188 billion. And that's a phenomenal amount of money. Just to put it into context, I mean, they're raising 25 billion from the increase in national insurance. They were trying to raise 5 billion from hitting disability benefits. They were going to save 1.7 billion from cutting the winter fuel allowance, compared with 188 billion more that's being spent on quangos. And this is where everything is completely out of kilter, and doesn't matter to what extent they try and put a spin on this wonderful things they're doing. The figures showing growth is negative, inflation is going up, everything is going, the deficit is mushrooming, it's gone up something like 3 times. Everything is a complete mess, and unless they cut quangos, they're going to continue to be in a mess. That's the reality of it.
Right, let's move back onto footy. And a lot of things are being said about the real value of players. I mean, Man U are paying over the top, as they usually do. What donkeys to let everybody rip them off, but it's happening again. And some commentators are saying these players that are being sold for 70 million pounds from the Cameroon, usually, are worth 1 million if you go 10 years ago. That's all you'd get for them 10 years ago. What has happened on football? How desperate are we?
Yeah, and some of the people they're signing aren't really up to it. You see, I actually think we should go back to what we used to do, which was, every club tried to run a successful academy and bring young players through into the team, and the best young players played for the team. That is, I think, the right way to run a football club, frankly. But you see, we have all these rules about spending. And the last time I looked, Chelsea had spent 213 million more on transfer fees than they had coming in. And that should lead, unless they make a profit, to severe penalties. But the fact they've won the Club World Cup, of course, that itself will bring in 90 million, but it's not all going to go to them. So they've got to be very careful. I mean, Manchester City did drastically fall foul of the spending rules, but I don't know what penalty they're going to face. You see, one of the things that's happened is that although they fell foul of the spending rules, because they were so successful and kept winning the Premiership, they also got a lot of money coming in, and they then made a profit of 500 million one year. Now, that may mean that they get away with having drastically broken the spending rules in the earlier years. I don't know, but you see, they should be applied. These rules should be applied properly. And I think they should be applied, frankly, on a yearly basis rather than just looking at a rolling 3 years, which is what they do. But yes, every club should be trying to bring their young players through and giving them a chance, not just spending ridiculous figures on transfer fees.
Yeah, we are at one with that. Finally, sticking to football, there's been some rather testy things said about Amorim. People either love him, Marmite, or hate him. But there's a big chance being taken at the moment. And Jamie Carragher has pointed this out, ex-Liverpool. No real love for United, but I tell you what, he talks sense, a lot of people say. And we are basing everything as Man U supporters on the fact that the system demands that type of player. And people are saying it would be far cheaper for Man United, especially as he's volunteered Amorim to go, to say goodbye now, because you can't buy players for a system. Well, it happens, I know, but he's paying over the odds. There's no guarantee it's going to work. And if he'd have worked a different system, maybe Rashford and others, the terrible five, would still be there and entertaining us.
Yeah, well, we've seen it a number of times where Man United have paid an awful lot of money for a player. They've not performed at Man United, and they've then sold them, and they started to perform brilliantly in another club. I think the same will probably happen with Sancho, frankly. I mean, he was performing brilliantly for Dortmund. He's been a complete flop at Manchester United. They're now saying they've got to offload him, and they're selling him on at a massive loss, and he'll probably perform brilliantly for another club. And it's just ridiculous what they're doing, frankly. They need to think very carefully about, you see, every player that you sign should be wanting to play for your club and be totally committed to playing for your club. If you get players that are there for the money, then it's not going to work. That's the reality of it.
It's real life also, isn't it?
Well, yes, but some players, the Man United are buying, are just earning so much money, they're not bothered.
No. Indeed, temptation. We'll finish up with temptation, Sid, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.